Xenos was a powerful but shy healer who got betrayed and kicked out of his party. However, everything changes when he opens an underground clinic to cure beast girls, but ends up getting them addicted to his fat needle instead. The story starts when Xenos is suddenly fired by his party leader, Aston, and given a gold coin as his severance pay, calling him a useless peasant who was no longer needed in the party. This betrayal cut deep, because Aston had been working so hard for the party, and Xenos was supposed to be his best friend, but the heartless scum kicked him out and warned him never to mention that he was once a member of their prestigious party. Disappointed, Xenos took the money and left, and on his way, he encountered an elven slave named Lily who was getting maltreated by her masters. One of them tried forcing his seedlings into her, so she kicked his saggy sack and tried to escape. But the old fool shot her down with an arrow and stabbed her, leaving her to bleed to death. Disgusted, Xenos offered to buy her with his severance pay, and the scumbags eagerly accepted the deal, since she was practically dead anyway. As soon as they left, Xenos healed Lily's stab wound within seconds. Amazed at how fast this happened, she asked him if he was a famous healer, but Xenos said he was just an unlicensed healer who had mastered the art of healing by himself. When he realized Lily had no home to return to, he generously got her clean clothes and bought her food at a restaurant. However, because of his jobless situation, Xenos couldn't even afford a plate for himself and was desperate to find a job. Suddenly, a lizardman named Zendo walked in there, bleeding from a pretty bad bullet wound on his arm. Xenos could tell that it was a magic gun that caused it, so he assured the man that it wasn't that deep, and then applied healing magic over the wound. Shocked, Zendo wondered who on earth this guy was, given how excellently his wound was healed, so he gave him 2 gold coins to appreciate his kindness. This was the first time Xenos ever received compensation for his work as a healer, so he realized that he could earn a living from his services and decided to open up an underground clinic since he had no license. However, he didn't want to drag Lily into this shady business, but she insisted on staying beside her master, and Xenos agreed to make her his assistant for as long as she remained Daddy's good girl. That evening, they went searching for a suitable location to operate the clinic, and Xenos decided to use an abandoned mansion in a desolate area. But Lily feared for her safety and warned him that there could be a wrath in the mansion. However, Xenos insisted on trying his luck, and Lily created a ball of light to guide them in. But just as she feared, a wraith named Carmilla appeared, disgusted by their audacity to invade her space. She attacked them, but Xenos repelled her with a magical barrier and apologized for invading her sweet privacy. However, Carmilla got pissed and summoned more wraiths to attack them, but Xenos cleared them with one command, and she had no choice but to let him stay, as long as he didn't go near the second floor. The next day, Xenos and Lily opened the clinic, and Zendo showed up again, this time with his sister, Zofia, whose arm was already decaying due to a gunshot injury. Xenos told her that her arm was gone and would have to be cut off to prevent the poison from spreading, but it would cost her 1,000,000 yen or she'd have to put that tongue to work. Annoyed, Zofia assumed he was only calling such a ridiculous price because of her position as leader of the lizardmen, but Xenos said in addition to amputating the rotten arm, he'd also grow her a new one. Although she doubted that anyone could create an arm from scratch, Zofia gave him a shot to prove himself and lay down. With a mana scalpel, Xenos got rid of the decayed arm and gradually regenerated her new arm layer by layer. Shocked, Zofia acknowledged that Xenos beat her expectations, and all the lizard men would only get treated in his clinic henceforth. Some days passed after, the leader of the werewolves, named Linga, rudely barged in with her bunch. Linga's werewolves were at war with Zofia's lizardmen, so she hated that they were always being healed of their injuries and sought out to get rid of Xenos. However, when she plunged towards him with her axe, Xenos' self-defense magic was automated and not even a scratch got to him. By Linga's order, the other werewolves all ganged up against him, and some used that chance to chew out his third leg. However, all their attempts at harming him failed, so Linga ordered them to destroy the clinic. While they were at it, Carmilla appeared and almost sent them all into the afterlife, but Xenos calmed her down, and Linga was shocked to see that a wraith as deadly as Carmilla would listen to Xenos. Remorsefully, she bowed with her subordinates and asked him for forgiveness because they had underestimated the extent of his powers. Right after the werewolves left, an orc showed up representing Loe, who was the orc leader and was too sick to move. Xenos followed him to the orc dungeon and found Loe stuck on her throne, so he scanned her and found that there was a mana stone in her stomach. He wondered how the stone got there in the first place, and found that the glutton thought it was a rice ball, and she gobbled it up, like she would have gobbled your gumball. Xenos called her an idiot and turned to leave, reassuring her that she would eventually expel the stone via her natural chocolate factory. However, she told him that she had partially chewed the mana stone, and it wasn't going to take too long for it to detonate, which is why she was stuck in her seat. Xenos asked her what she was expecting him to do, and she said that the reason why she had summoned him was to donate her wealth to his clinic after her death because she didn't want the orc's wealth to be plundered. She felt that Xenos would make better use of the money, since he was an excellent healer who was willing to treat the neighboring kids for free. As she threw the key to him, Xenos asked if she had only recently ingested the stone, and when she confirmed it, he pulled out the stone with his scalpel while simultaneously healing the incision wound. Seconds later, the stone detonated in his hand, but he was unhurt because his defense magic was activated before it went off. He then returned the dungeon key to Loe, who was surprised at his sincerity because he could have easily kept his mouth shut and inherited all her fortune. As his reward, she said she owed him a huge debt if he ever needed her help, and added that the orcs provide security for his clinic. Later that day, Lily was fussy because Loe, Zofia, and Linga had been visiting too frequently, even though they weren't wounded or sick. However, Carmilla said it was definitely because the ladies were obsessed with him and all wanted their daily share of his fat baguette. Xenos denied the possibility of this happening because he was just a basic underground healer who was unremarkable and had no license. But Carmilla told him not to kid himself because those ladies liked him enough to beat each other up for him. On the other hand, Lily sulked even more because she was just a girl and couldn't compete with those goth mommies and their oversized melons. Yet, Carmilla encouraged her not to give up on her love for Xenos because she was equally gorgeous and capable of winning his heart. Just as Carmilla predicted, the girls came in one after the other, stating that they would declare war on each other and wanted Xenos to take their side. As they dropped their gifts, Xenos felt so overwhelmed because he couldn't stop them, and they had set a date for their battle. The day arrived, and they all braced up for battle in the arena, prepared to spill each other's blood while Xenos would spill his milk on them. However, he arrived and told them that he wasn't there to stop their fight but to encourage them even to go all out since they had been fighting long before he came. The battle began, and no matter how hard they cut and gnawed at each other, they noticed that their opponents seemed not to be dying, and even their own wounds were healed instantly. It was then that Xenos confessed that he had been secretly healing them because they were all his patients and he couldn't bear to see them in pain. It finally occurred to everyone that fighting would be pointless because no one would win in the end, so they decided to stop fighting and forgive each other. However, the ladies said that they would still have petty fights to determine who would get the lion's share of Xenos' kitty destroyer. After everything, Lily asked Xenos why he had gone to such lengths for the Beastman, and he said his mentor had once taught him that a healer was third-rate if they could heal injuries, second-rate if they could heal a person, and first-rate if they could make the world a better place. Lily was moved because she knew that Xenos had still initiated peace among the three factions, despite knowing that this would reduce his business patronage since there would be fewer injuries. Then she confessed that she liked him, but Xenos wasn't trying to be found in another rich dude's files, so he played dumb. The next scene showed the city's division commander telling his vice commander, Krishna, that the turf war between the demi-humans had suddenly calmed down. This was bad news for the royals who were at the top, because now the poor had a united front and could pose a threat to the ruling people, more especially their king. To get to the bottom of things, he told her to investigate the matter and she promised to apprehend whoever was responsible for calming the war down. Meanwhile, the ladies were all at Xenos' house, and they shared that all their previous arm injuries were sustained during fights with the royal knights. Zofia's brother said that it was the vice commander who had blasted his arm with the flame magic gun moments before he reported to Xenos' clinic. The vice commander was known as Iron Rose because she could cause so much havoc without flinching. Carmilla giggled, saying that the Iron Rose was most probably going to join his little harem, but Xenos said that no high and mighty royal knight would care about him, who was just a quack healer. Meanwhile, Krishna had arrived at the slums dressed in a disguise, and she asked a lizard man why there was peace between the three factions of the slums. But he said he couldn't share anything with her because the person responsible for that peace wanted to maintain a low profile. However, Krishna threatened him with her magic gun and asked him to reveal the name of the mediator. The lizard man remained firm in his decision not to rat out Xenos, and when he spotted some of his people, he shouted for help. Immediately, Krishna disappeared from the scene because she knew they had now fully recovered and fighting them would be a pretty bad idea. She was lost and didn't know where she was, and also didn't know her way around the slums. Coincidentally, she landed in Xenos' house and asked him for directions to get back into town, but the moment Lily showed up, Krishna shot right at Xenos. Apparently, Krishna had been working on a case concerning people who abducted children, and seeing Lily, she thought she was also a victim, which was why she shot Xenos. However, Lily told her she was wrong because Xenos was actually her savior, and Krishna felt bad, saying the effects of the gunpowder would wear off after some time. To her surprise, Xenos was very much awake and alert, and somehow they both got into a heated argument over who was creepier than the other. She later introduced herself as the vice commander of the Royal Knights and said Xenos would have to comply with her investigation because she was there to apprehend a certain individual. She described this person as the mediator who calmed the war between the three factions and said that guy had to be serving the devil because it seemed everyone was under his spell. Xena suggested that the guy in question may just want to avoid the spotlight, but Krishna insisted that such a person who wielded so much power could be a threat to the nation in no time. Lily said that whoever Krishna was talking about certainly wasn't thinking of something that's serious and probably just didn't like seeing people get hurt. However, when Krishna asked her to reveal the person, she lied and said that she didn't know him. Realizing she wouldn't get a word from anyone there, Krishna decided to leave but surprisingly decided to stay after spotting a spare bed and said she would be running her operations from that house until she apprehended the mediator. Later, Lily served her some tea and suddenly decided to give Xena's a lap dance just to make Krishna jealous because she was getting a little too cozy with her man. Xena's was completely clueless as to why she was acting that way, so Carmilla explained that Lily was only trying to assert dominance over this haughty, arrogant lady seated across from her, just so she would know who had Xena's wrapped around her finger. From that moment, Lily kept offering to cater for Xena's in different ways, but when she noticed that Krishna was paying her no attention, she resorted to her final move, saying she wouldn't let Xenos have a wink of sleep because he'd be up all night, pounding her. When she was done with all her shenanigans for the day, Lily fell fast asleep, and Krishna asked Xenos if he knew the identity of Lily's abductors. This was because even though she was a commander of the Knights, she still had a duty to the citizens of their land to protect them. That aside, she asked Xenos whether anyone would be able to fully regenerate an arm if they mastered the art of magic defense, but by herself, she realized that no one other than a saint and top-secret healer of their land would achieve such a feat. This was on her mind because she had damaged Zophia's arm significantly, so she was surprised to find that it was completely healed and back to normal, and this only meant that whoever healed Zophia may be responsible for mediating among the three factions. She decided to begin her investigation the next day to arrest the mediator, and Xenos asked her why she seemed so agitated towards the slums. She then shared that her mom was murdered by someone in the slums, even though this same woman visited the slums daily to feed the hungry. The motive behind her mother's murder was investigated, and it happened only because someone wanted to steal her ring, and this injustice inspired Krishna to become an excellent officer who would deliver justice against the criminals of the slums. In doing so, she became a highly respected officer at a young age, and people nicknamed her Iron Rose because she lost her ability to smile after losing her mom. After she left, Zophia visited Xenos so she could get her arm healed, but Krishna showed up coincidentally because she got lost again, and both ladies were ready for a full-blown fight. Krishna asked what Zophia was doing there, and Lily said that Zophia also got lost and was asking them for directions. So Krishna asked Zophia to tell her who healed her arm. Somehow, Zophia turned the topic around to Krishna's investigation into the child trafficking ring. She told her that, contrary to what she thought, the boss of the child trafficking ring was actually some filthy rich sugar pappy who launched his operation in the slums to throw suspicion off himself. Krishna said it was ridiculous, and when she heard the name of the aristocrat, Calendar, she couldn't believe it because Calendar was always feeding and educating orphans in their city. Zophia told her that Calendar was just a scam using his charity as a front to cover his evil schemes. On the other hand, the mediator who made peace among the slum factions was a sweet guy who never judged the citizens of the slums, unlike Krishna herself, who seemed to think every evil arose from the slums. Just then, Xena stepped in front of Zophia, saying she was one of his patients and apologizing for hiding the fact that he was the mediator from Krishna. Krishna denied this, saying the mediator's ability was healing magic, but the ability she had seen Xenos specialize in was defensive magic, and there was no way for anyone to wield two schools of magic at a very high level. In any case, she assumed that Xenos had taken the side of the slum people and the mediator, so she decided to launch her operations from a different place. Right after leaving Xenos' clinic, Krishna visited Calendar and told him that thieves had been operating in his area, and in order to increase his local security, she had to perform a sudden security assessment of his manor. Secretly, she was searching for clues pointing to him as the kingpin of the kidnappings, so she took an excuse to use the restroom and found an underground tunnel in which she shockingly found lots of boys and girls locked up in cells. Just as she was reassuring a girl that she would save her, Calendar shot at her and was about to completely finish her off when Zophia and Xenos appeared from behind. The fat fool shot repeatedly at Xenos but realized that Xenos was aura-proof for bullets. Left to the mercy of Xenos, Calendar begged for forgiveness, but Xenos blasted all his clothes away and left him to scurry off like the pig he was. On the other hand, Krishna was at the point of death, so Xenos gave her that sensational healing, and when she recovered, she said he was more of a perfect hero than she would ever be. However, the children, though blindfolded, called Krishna their hero, and Xenos said she really was a hero because she made the first move. This brought her to tears as she realized that her mom may not have been a perfect woman, but she was also someone's hero, and more specifically, Krishna's hero. Later, they rescue the children, and when Krishna asked Xenos why he rescued her, he said it was all so she could pay her bills. For the first time in her life, Krishna smiled and said she owed Xenos for helping her smile again. In the present day, Xenos is out on a walk with Lily, remembering when, years back, he was just a broke kid living in the slums who later got invited to Aston's party. Aston, as the hero, did most of the slaying, but he never noticed that Xenos was busy healing every slight cut he sustained during his battle against the monsters. Eventually, Aston got so pumped and arrogant and said Xenos was useless because all he did was stand and watch, which was what led to Xenos getting fired from the party. Presently, Aston and his party members embark on a high-end quest located deep in the forest. They brag about their current reputation as members of the Golden Phoenix Party who have been slaying multiple magic beasts without even a scratch. Soon, they encounter some fire wolves, and Aston thinks it's going to be business as usual, and he'll be dropping the monsters like flies. He tells one team member to put up some defensive magic, thinking that would protect him from harm, but to his utmost shock, he gets bitten and burnt by a fiery wolf, while his team member is chewed like fresh virgin meat. Eventually, Aston tells his team members to back down since nobody's magic seems to be working, and they walk out defeatedly after failing to defeat B-ranked magic beasts. One of them acknowledges that perhaps all this time, Xenos had been healing them with his magic, but Aston is still in denial, like your father is of you, and says that such abilities are mostly found among high-end citizens, not peasants like Xenos. 10 days later, they hire a healer named Uman, and even she is surprised that a high-end party like the Golden Phoenix would hire such a mid-rank healer as herself. She also mentions that their member who got ferociously attacked by the firewolves may never survive another adventure again. But Aston says that the idiot wasn't Golden Phoenix material anyway, and the 3 members left are capable of achieving success without him. They aim to get Firefox fur for a certain lord's daughter, and if they're successful, they'll be recognized among the higher echelon. Their battle begins, and Aston realizes he can't quite land a single blow on a single Firefox, not to mention that his whole body feels slow, while another team member gets shot in the stomach with a ball of fire. This leads Aston into frustration, and he swings aimlessly, but it's all futile. They retreat yet again, and he attacks the team member who's responsible for casting defense magic, saying he didn't do his job. But Human tells him the defense magic got activated, and that is why the priest isn't dead already. Aston orders her to heal the priest already, but Human says what he's asking is only possible among high-ranking healers, particularly the saints, so for now, they can only help his friend in a hospital. For a minute, Aston wonders whether he was wrong to kick Xenos out because he was probably the reason why they hadn't been sustaining injuries, but he dismisses the idea because Xenos is just a slumdog wannabe hero. He asks Uman if there is someone capable of such elite healing magic who has no healing license, but she says it is hard to imagine such a thing. Moments later, the Lord, for whom they are to fetch the Firefox skin, sends his representative to dismiss them because his daughter's birthday has passed and they failed to keep to their end of the bargain. Aston says that it isn't their fault, but rather the traitor in their team, Xenos. But he just realizes that he never wants scum like Xenos to associate himself with the party, so he quickly retracts his statement and begs for another chance. The man says there is no hope for their party since half of its members are no longer around, but Aston promises to recruit new members and promises to deliver unfailingly. The other team member asks Aston why he made such a brash promise, and Aston responds that they could easily invite Xenos to resume being their slave, and he would jump at the opportunity. When they go searching the slums for Xenos, they don't find him, and the other guy thinks he may have died somewhere in a ditch. But Aston comes up with an idea to hire the 3 demi-human bosses of the slums so they would help find Xenos for them. First, they meet Zofia, and Aston can't wait to bury his face in her rice cakes. But first, he tells her to help him find Xenos. Surprisingly, she bursts out laughing, recognizing him as the person who kicked Xenos out of their party. She then tells them to find something better to do with their lives because Xenos is too busy for them, and so is she. They visit Linga, but she calls them toilet roaches, and finally, Lowe warns them to get out and warns that if they ever harass Xenos, they will be beaten to death. Aston can't believe that the 3 slum bosses are obsessed with Xenos, so he lies to himself that it has got to be some namesake of Xenos, not the trash scumboy he knows. Just then, Xenos and Lily pass by, and Aston stops him, asking him what he's doing there. He invites him to join the party again, but Xenos turns him down, saying there's nothing to look forward to, especially not serving as a junk boy and having to bob his head up and down Aston's cylinder whenever he needed him to. Aston is shocked because he had expected Xenos to come back crawling with excitement, but rather, Xenos is even charging him up to 1,000,001 for each critical injury and has tripled the cost for defensive and buff magic. Aston gets pissed and mocks Xenos, saying he doesn't even have a place even in the slums, but coincidentally, the whole community flocks around him. He gaslights Zenos by saying he gave him his very first opportunity to join a hero's party, but not even that changes Zenos' mind, and he turns to leave. With his ego suffering 1,000 blows, Aston draws his sword, attempting to strike Zenas, but Krishna appears right then and shoots him down. Just when she's about to apprehend him and take him to the police station, the coward blames everything on his teammate and takes off on his heels. Later that day, the girls each share their encounter with Aston, and it turns out they all sent their subordinates to keep a trail on Aston. However, they lose him, and their biggest fear right now is that he will seek support from the Underground Guild, which comprises notorious people who are willing to take all sorts of jobs for a fee, and some, such as the guide, who wouldn't even mind getting no pay just to wreak havoc. Having heard everything about them, Xena struggles to fall asleep, and Lily prepares some tea for him and strokes his hair, hoping he'll fall asleep. However, she ends up falling asleep, and after he tucks her in, Carmilla joins him, asking if he's worried about the run-in with his ex-teammates. He tells her that at the moment, he's only thinking about when he started learning how to heal in the slums. Apparently, he had attempted to revive a corpse, which was a form of forbidden sorcery, but he didn't know that because he was just a boy. Carmilla shares her own experience, saying that when she was alive, there was a form of sorcery to create golems, but that was 300 years back. Just then, they hear a massive explosion, and Carmilla goes to check things out. To her utmost shock, there is a super huge golem rampaging through the slums. The next scene shows a hooded guy receiving a contract from Aston to get rid of Zenas and his counterparts. This guy is willing to do so without getting paid because he's been looking for a perfect opportunity to test out his latest creation. Zenas and Carmilla are outside when the three girls bump into them, sharing that a good number of orcs and werewolves have been injured, and they don't understand what sort of creature it is. Zenos and Carmilla inform them that it's a creature produced from sorcery that existed over 300 years ago, and Lowe says that one of the orcs noticed the golem coming from within the deepest slums. Zenas wonders whether this could be from the Underground Guild he was told about, but right now, his major concern is for the girls to gather all the injured in one spot. Meanwhile, the cloaked guy responsible for this golem is watching from a distance, glad to see the golem cause so much destruction and eager to see how Zenos would react when the people who admire him die one after the other. Tirelessly, the villagers of the slums help each other and gather their injured in one place. So Zenas uses a high heal skill to treat all their wounds at once. Unknown to him, the golem's master is watching and is impressed with Zenos' level of skill as an elite healer, and says Zenos has won the first round of chaos, just for now. Minutes later, the girls say there are no more wounded people to be found and thank Zenos because no one has died just yet, thanks to his timely intervention. Right now, Zenos hopes this huge dude will get tired and go get laid or something, but Carmilla says that golems don't stop until they've fulfilled their orders, and she suspects that the orders for this golem are just to destroy the slums. Carmilla, though, says it doesn't make sense because the core of golems is made from a magic stone only found in the demon castle, and its supply was exhausted during a war years ago, so it will be such a pain to investigate who is behind this. Xena says there's no time for him to mope around, so he would take down the monster, but the girls say they are strongly behind him. Also, Carmilla informs him that he would have to destroy the monster's core completely, or else it would regenerate for as long as it can. As the monster approaches, Zenos instructs the girls to attack it with everything they have, and he boosts the impact of their attacks. However, the monster throws the girls, but luckily, they sustain a few injuries. Zenos draws closer because his magic effects are only stronger from a close distance, and so he can heal any injuries they sustain. He also notices that the monster takes a certain amount of time to regenerate, so he tells the girls to destroy both its legs. But just then, Zofia spots a child in the way, and Zenos rushes to protect her from getting harmed, but surprisingly, the golem stops right in its tracks. All this time, the golem's master is watching and only hopes Zenos is ready for the climax of that fight. After observing the weird behavior of this golem, both Carmilla and Zenos accept that there is a human inside, who is most likely to be Aston. Apparently, the golem's master made the golem by combining an imperfect magic stone with Aston to create a new core. Currently, Aston and the magic stone are one, so it's going to be a pretty tricky fight for Zenos, who may be forced to take the very life of his ex-team member. With everything at stake, Zenos tells the girls to back off because he's the only one who can settle everything with the golem, and he tells Aston that he knows he still has some humanity left in him, especially after seeing that he left the little girl unharmed. All this while, Aston keeps agitating, and Zenos is set for his final move, so he shatters through the golem's body, destroys its core, and exposes Aston. After, he slices his chest, and the golem's master is slightly disappointed because he had hoped to see Zenos struggle just a bit, but he didn't even hesitate to end Aston. Just when the guy thinks the show is over and he turns to leave, he finds out that Zenas is actually trying to separate Aston from the imperfect magic stone. He goes at it in bits and pieces, healing and preventing the regeneration of the stone all at the same time. Gollum's daddy stands watching in awe because he can't believe that anyone can be so excellent with their hands outside a bedroom. Meanwhile, Zenos says he won't let Aston die easily because he also has to confess who put him up to all the shenanigans. Besides, Aston's done two good things for Zenos, taking him out of the slums and giving him the gold coin that changed his life by allowing him to purchase Lily and start his clinic. With one final swing of his sword, the power of the Mana Stone is relinquished, and Aston acknowledges that Zenos' persistence and resilience in life are what make him hate his guts. He also confesses that he spent his whole life using others but ended up being used at the end, proving that he's the biggest joke his dad ever made. Following his pathetic speech, Aston kneels and apologizes to Zenos for all the trouble he's caused. But this time, Zenos isn't being so merciful, and he throws a nice punch to Aston's face. By the time the idiot wakes up, he is stripped of everything from his dignity down to the last piece of cloth on him, and Krishna is standing right beside him, arresting him for his multiple offenses, while he traumatizes the public by shamelessly brandishing his mini pickle. But surprisingly, Zenas has left him a gold coin to get back on his feet, so the idiot breaks down crying, like some old geezer who finally gets some after years of getting brothers owned. After everything, Zenas returns his, and on the way, the other girls squeeze him between their goodie bags. Meanwhile, the caped figure decides to retire into his place of hiding, convinced he will still run into Zenas another time. The next day, Krishna reports that her investigations about the previous Gollum incident yielded nothing fruitful, and all she knows is that the guy behind it is known as the Guide. However, no one knows his face or where he lived, and the building where he conducted the transaction with Aston has been destroyed. The three boss ladies also share what they know about him, but Krishna says that they should leave speculations to her since she's the one actually hired to investigate. Zenas says they should stop hollering at each other and pushes them out of the room, so Lily tries, suggesting a hot spring visit to cure his stress. But before she can make a complete statement, Zofia bursts in and suggests that they go to a hot spring. Lily is already heartbroken when Linga comes in and suggests a hot spring as well. Loie comes in with the same suggestion, and finally, Krishna comes in, mentioning the same thing. At this point, Lily doesn't mind disappearing or getting buried alive, so when Zenas asks her what she wanted to tell him, she simply says nothing. At the hot spring, Zofia sneaks into the men's bathroom, gets in the bath, and starts making small talk to get Zenos in the mood. Obviously, her main aim is to ravage that sausage, so she attacks him after getting close enough, and Linger jumps in to grab her own share. To top it all off, Loie springs up from under the water, completely undressed, but the battle hasn't even yet begun until Krishna appears, yelling at them to leave the men's bathroom, even though she herself is in there with them. As the girls return to the women's bathroom, the healer from Aston's team, Ooman, admires them from afar because she's never seen socially diverse people get along so easily. Right beside her, Lily mopes because she doesn't have big, batty bazookas like the demi-human girls, which is why she wasn't confident enough to charge into the men's bathroom as they did. But when she looks at the girl she's pouring her heart out to, Lily realizes that her own chest has more potential. In the bath, Carmilla tells her that it's not really always about the size, although the whole Brotherhood may disagree on this one. Amun is startled when she sees a wraith in the pool and begins chanting some prayers, but by then, Carmilla has already completely disappeared. Later, the team sits down to a lovely feast, and it ends with all the girls getting super wasted. Zenas is stressed out, as usual, so he goes to relax in the sitting room and chats with Carmilla, asking her how she made it to the hot springs, even though she can't survive staying under the sun for so long. But she says she possessed a staff, and Lily brought it alongside her on the journey. Zenas finds this the perfect opportunity to ask her what her life was like when she was alive, but Carmilla says it was so long ago that she's forgotten. From this, it's obvious, even to a blockhead like Zenos, that Carmilla doesn't like talking about her past. The next morning, there's a loud explosion at the springs due to some fire magic stones, and the owner of the hot springs is severely wounded. Human tries to cure the man's wounds but says he may never work in the kitchen ever again. Just then, Zenas comes in, asking her to explain the situation, so she says the man has sustained serious burn injuries and would need to be transported to the Royal Hospital, where he can be placed in advanced healing magic circles. All this sounds like gibberish to Zenas because he has never heard of it, so he nonchalantly gets up since Lily calls him to say their ride is around, and Human judges him from within, wondering what sort of healer would abandon a hurt patient. She just doesn't notice yet when Zenos stretches his arm to heal the man, and the guy gets up confidently without a scratch. Now Human doubts for a second, wondering whether it was her spell that healed him, but she knows her dead brain can't produce such excellence. Eventually, she accepts that it must have been Zenas' doing and he has to be a saint or an elite healer. Unable to keep this to herself, she shares this with her superior and describes all of Zenos's features to the guy. He instantly suspects that Zenos may not be a legal citizen but rather one from the slums, and so he is eager to meet an elite healer like himself. The next day, he disguises himself as a sick patient who's coughed up tons of blood and collapsed. As he lies on the patient bed, Zenos diagnoses him with a condition known as red lung, a pandemic that has previously claimed lots of lives. But just then, the guy gets up, impressed by Zenos's impeccable diagnosis, and he introduces himself as Becker, an elite healer from the Royal Hospital who's pretty bad with healing magic. As for his condition, he doesn't really have the red lung disease, but has been mimicking its symptoms by consuming a potion that makes him sick enough to cough blood. However, he reassures Zenos that he'll be fine because he has taken the antidote. Zenos is seriously impressed and wonders where this drug comes from. So the guy explains that he actually created it himself while desperately trying to find the cure for the red lung disease. From there, Ooman chips in that Becker is a highly recognized healer who has made so many breakthroughs in medicine. Meanwhile, Becker himself says he rushed eagerly when he heard about a healer wearing a black coat because he thought he would recognize the person. He thought it was someone he knew. He asks Zenos whether the black coat is his, but Zenos says it belongs to his mentor, who never actually told him his name. After that, Becker offers Zenos a position to work at the Royal Hospital because they need his expertise on a pressing subject. But just then, the three boss ladies show up because Carmilla hoisted the red flag, pointing to an emergency. The ladies confront Becker, asking where he thinks he's taking their man away to. This amuses Becker, seeing how Zenos can rizz up a whole continent, and he changes his strategy and offers Zenos a commission to work at the Royal Hospital. Zenos readily accepts this despite the girl's warnings because he knows his status as an underground healer has been busted, and he would need as many allies in the Royal Hospital as he can have. He also says that Becker is a pretty good doctor who fought for the cure of the red lung disease to be distributed freely to the masses in the slums by paying for it. More importantly, Becker seems to know details about Zenos's mentor, and he promised Zenos to give him more details about the man if only he would agree to accompany them to the Royal Hospital. After that, they both seal their deal with a handshake. Later, they arrive at Becker's office, and he tells Zenos that he will be operating as a man named Zeno, who has recently returned from abroad. And obviously, since Becker himself is an elite healer vouching for Zenos, no one would bother him. Surprisingly, Lily later shows up because Yuman brought her on board, registered as Zenos' little sister. As soon as Yuman leaves, Lily starts making moves towards him, and he wonders who taught her all that. But of course, it just has to be her only fan, Carmilla. He wonders why Carmilla is just so careless, knowing she's in a place filled with healers who could easily exorcise her. But she says that only a few of those healers there have as much power as Zenos. Later, Zenos has lunch with Ooman, who explains the process of getting a license, which is essentially passing the board exam, after which he can work at a branch of the Royal Hospital, work in the field as an adventurer, or just become a worthless politician. She also tells him that the people flocking around are there to advance their healing careers, but Zenos feels like his brain is working overtime, so Ooman focuses on the necessary details for his mission. She mentions a missing healer named Alfred, an upper-class man who's super smart and kind, and had worked on the cure for the red lung disease alongside Becker. Just when Zenos gets interested in meeting this guy, a certain professor named Goldran, the vice director of the hospital, walks in, and Ooman tells Zenos that the guy is a Class 7 healer, which is the highest rank of healers. However, ever since Goldran started running the Royal Hospital, only the rich patients receive advanced care, while the poor are left to die due to his political ambition. In fact, it is rumored that Goldran's promotion to Class 7 Advanced Healer has something to do with his political influence, more than his actual talent. Since this guy sounds like trouble, Zenos says he'll steer clear of him, but Ooman tells him that's not an option, because this guy may be involved in Alfred's disappearance due to his ambitious desire to have all the talented individuals working directly for him. He had somehow gotten a friend to work for him, but months later, when the boy disappeared, he claimed to know nothing about his whereabouts. Just then, a guy named Crescent pops up dramatically, speaking rudely towards Zenos and telling him not to embarrass his sponsor. Yoon explains that it's because even though they are classmates, he got recruited to Goldran's group and has become so pompous ever since. This takes Zenos back to a period when he was still pretty young and trying to resurrect a dead person, and his mentor appeared and trained him and another in the art of healing while teaching them not to get cocky. In the present, Zenos attends his first lecture, which is about the undead, and some boy asks about wraiths. Surprisingly, the teacher says that very little is known about wraiths and there are very few eyewitness reports, so if they ever run into wraiths, they should say their last prayers. Also, if the wraith happened to be a verbal one, that was way more than anyone could handle. Now, Zenos realizes he's got a talking wraith in his room but decides not to say anything. Next, The teacher asks the students to share their experience fighting undead if they have ever run into one. So, Crescent gets up, introduces himself, and says he has taken down 30 ghosts. He asks Xenos whether he's ever done so, and Xenos humbly says he can beat 30 at once, even though he really can actually beat twice that amount at once. The teacher suddenly becomes interested in Xenos and asks him where he finds the ghost from. So Xenos mentions an underground dungeon, but the teacher is stunned because even gold-class parties hesitate to visit that place. Feeling threatened, Crescent says he doesn't like Xenos and tells him to stop spewing lies just because he wants to stand out. But Xenos says he's trying not to stand out in the first place. Next, the teacher teaches them about magic circles and tells them to draw their best magic circles. So Crescent steps forward first, draws his, and gets applauded by the professor, but he soon tells Xenos to come up and draw his own circle. Xenos doesn't know much about magic circles because he doesn't use them, but he draws the only one he knows, and the professor is shocked and impressed because it's a complex type of circle. The prof thinks it will be impossible to activate the magic circle, but Xenos simply taps it with his finger, and it comes to life, immediately compelling this prof to beg him to join his lab. Crescent gets angry and jealous because he realizes he's just a beta where Xenos stands. Also, one of Professor Goldrin's employees tells him about Xenos, but he says he's not opening his faction to some rando, and they should test Xenos' abilities by assigning him to deal with some undead so he can secure a spot. Later, Xenos accompanies the other healers to a graveyard where they tackle some undead, but they handle it so inefficiently that he gets tired, uses his high heal skill, and defeats them all at once. However, Crescent takes the glory for this achievement because he can't allow some newbie freak to steal his sugar daddy from him, and he tells the rest of them to report that it was he who defeated the undead. He also confronts Xenos, saying he will never accept him, and walks away, but Xenos says they have not even defeated the real one. Right before them, a zombie king appears, and the others place their faith in Crescent, saying he is their only hope. But the idiot blasts his diaper because suddenly his brazen balls have failed him. He asks Uman and Xenos to help him, and then he casts his best magic spell, the High Heal, but that doesn't even hurt a fly. Soon, the monster chases after him until it beats the nonsense out of him and turns him into a soccer ball. Soon, the monster squeezes the juice out of Crescent and is about to eat his brains out when Uman cries out for help, and Xenos casts a Mega Heal spell, which binds the monster and defeats it. But after this, the ingrate complains that he never asked anyone to help him, even though he's the one screaming daddy right before the monster has him. When Xenos returns, he tells Carmilla that the undead that suddenly appeared in the area did so because she's around and they are drawn to her presence. She feels he's about to kick her out, but he says that it's probably safer to keep her beside him, given the effect she has on her surroundings. Hearing this, Lily feels hot sauce trickling down her legs because she wishes Xenos would talk to her like that. At the same time, Carmilla gets in touch with her feelings for the first time ever because she can't believe anyone would want to keep a wraith by their side. Meanwhile, a member of the Goldrin faction calls Crescent and commends him for his excellent performance in the subjugation of the undead. However, the same man says that Xenos performed horribly and should not be allowed into the faction. But guilt overwhelms Crescent because he knows he would have been squashed berries if not for Xenos, so he acknowledges that even though he performed well, Xenos equally fought well under his supervision. Eventually, Xenos gets a message from Becker that he has been invited into the Goldran faction, although he would first have to be interviewed by the founder of the faction. Later, Xenos appears before Goldrin himself, who asks him to draw a magic circle and prove his legitimacy. He does so, and the man gives him a short lecture about how healers are supposed to rule the city, while the poor should just keep being poor, so he should aim higher. The man looks at Xenos' magic circle and slams it with a solid 5-star review, and then he invites him to join their lab starting the next day. In the morning, all members of the Gold Run faction follow their leader like ducklings, and Crescent tells the confused-looking Xenos to get in line. Xenos asks Crescent why he ended up recommending him for the job, but Crescent tells him not to get in his head because he only brought him on board because he was a perfect opportunity for him to ascend the ranks of the faction. Apparently, they are currently on a procession for the generals for Goldrin's general rounds to visit patients. After seeing the first patient, Goldrin and his immediate subheads get into the room while the rest are left behind. Crescent tells Xenos that the professor does his rounds with a long entourage just to make an impression, particularly because most of Goldrin's patients are rich aristocrats, and he's terribly allergic to poverty. But Xenos wants to find out what's going on with this sketchy dude and hopefully uncover secrets related to Alfred's disappearance. So he runs up to the door, peeps, and sees the professor transferring healing abilities from some of his members to his patient with a sprained ankle. Xenos wonders what this is all about, and Crescent explains that the professor's magic abilities help transfer magic, which transfers life force between people. For example, if there is a wounded patient, the professor only has to transfer life force from a person so that patient gets healed. But the more severe the injury, the larger the number of healthy people required to transfer sufficient health to the patient so that the donors of the life force won't get completely drained and may only be a bit weak. However, the biggest reason why Goldran has so many people under his faction is in preparation for his possible election as director of the Royal Hospital. Since Crescent is in the mood to run his mouth, Xenos probes him to share about Alfred. But Crescent says that Alfred was one of the professor's favorites who got himself missing right before things were about to turn around for him. Apparently, the professor had invited him to dinner like he usually does with all his favorites, but somehow Alfred got missing since that day. After hearing this, Xenos reports his findings to Becker, and Becker says that Xenos would have to help them a little more by becoming one of the professor's favorites and making it into one of the dinner parties which the professor only invites his favorites to attend. And for that, he would not only pay him extra, but also ensure to show Xenos just how important his mission is. Becker throws some coins on the floor and asks him which he would pick first. And then he brings to mind the question about whether all humans should be treated equally or not. But just then, Human reminds Becker that he has a meeting to attend and he tells Xenos that he's counting on him. Meanwhile, Linga snuck into Xenos' house to help him clean up the clinic and also get high on his natural milk. But to her surprise, Zafia and Louis are also there with the intention of cleaning up the space. The next day, Crescent tells Xenos to watch after the professor's beloved puppy and somehow reveals that the only work he's good enough for in that lab is taking care of the pup, feeding her, and satisfying her in every possible way. Again, Crescent goes on yapping about the professor, saying he's currently meeting with the 7 major nobles that he's currying favor from. And this is exciting for Crescent, because if the professor gets what he wants, then hopefully Crescent also gets a promotion and unlimited cheeks to clap. But Xenos finds this weird because he felt the aim of the job was to heal people, not clap every cheek in the universe. Just then, the professor's secretary walks by and Crescent says that that dude is friends with the prof and got easy access to the position as secretary, even though he barely got any job done and only gets wasted. The wasted secretary then throws a bottle of his piss and the professor's puppy runs from Crescent's grasp to catch what was thrown. However, she accidentally gets hit by a vehicle and starts bleeding. Crescent uses his healing magic to restore her, but is severely worried because even though she's now back on her feet, the scars will remain. Xena steps in to help, but Crescent tells him that even if he can defeat a zombie king, his healing magic can certainly not cover for scars. But to his greatest surprise, the puppy's bleeding is completely stopped and her scars have disappeared. And then Xenos picks her up, telling Crescent that it's time for her to rest from his shenanigans. Later, Human asks Xenos to join her for a walk and says she wants to apologize because she should have been the one trying to gain the professor's attention and investigating him, as opposed to Xenos. But due to her incompetence, he has to be dragged into their mess, and she feels guilty for that. However, he tells her that Becker will pay him back. Besides, if it wasn't for this mission, he would never have had the opportunity to set foot in the Royal Hospital, so he's grateful for the opportunity because it has taught him a lot and provided him an opportunity to learn more about his mentor. Speaking of his mentor, Human asks him what sort of person he was, and Xenos says that the man was pretty much a delinquent, although he taught him so much about diseases, injuries, and magic. Human says she can say the same thing about Becker, although right now she has to take care of him because his girlfriend left him due to his undersized plumbing tool. After the conversation, Celeste comes running and begs them to help bail him out because he's found himself in a bind. Meanwhile, Professor Goldran seems to be deeply worried following his lunch with Lord Fennel. Apparently, the Lord asked Goldran to help cure his daughter of a rash, but the professor's worry right now is that healing the rash might leave a scar, depending on how deeply rooted in her skin it is, and that will require him to transfer magic and life force from so many people to regenerate her skin. However, Fennel's daughter thinks she's a 10 out of 10, so she doesn't want so many people seeing her face, meaning the prof can only treat her with at most 2 assistants, which won't be enough for the health energy transfer process. On his way out, his wasted secretary rats out on Crescent, saying the guy let his pup get run over by a carriage. The professor is livid and expects to see his pup in pretty bad shape, but he's surprised to find her hale and hearty. And that just makes him wonder what sort of person healed her wounds without leaving a trace. Apparently, the prof thinks it's Crescent and has even invited him to perform the facial surgery on Fennel's daughter. But Crescent knows he's just a quack and can't even try, so he pleads with Xenos to help him perform the surgery. Just then, Lily walks in with tea for them, and Crescent calls her cute. But she tells him that never in his wildest dreams will he score a shot with her because she belongs only to Xenos. Given the fact that Human has told Crescent that Lily and Xenos are siblings, Crescent knows they do nasty things when Mummy and Daddy aren't around. Anyway, he tells her that since Xenos is his bro, then she's his sister by extension, But the poor guy gets rudely rejected, and Lily says that she would never want such an older brother like him. Later, Lord Fennel summons the professor and his team, saying that his daughter, Charlotte, has refused the surgery because she doesn't want any scar on her face. However, Fennel still has faith in the professor and begs him to help cure Charlotte. When he gets to the door of her bedroom and tries to convince her to come out, she refuses to let him in, saying he was just a liar who never delivers on his promises. Professor Goldrin tries as well to try and to convince her, but Charlotte also pays him no attention. Now, Crescent thinks this is his chance to flex his pickup lines and bag him a sweet Nepo baddie, but to his utmost disappointment, she calls him a bloody assistant and orders him to get out. Finally, Zenas tries his luck and tells her that if she wants, she doesn't have to get surgery because he understands her fear of going under the knife, but without surgery, the pimple will cause her face to transform into that of an old woman. Surprisingly, Charlotte listens to him and comes out to see them, but remains so wicked to Crescent, telling him not to cause an apocalypse with his bad breath. She still refuses to be caught because she doesn't want pain or any scars, and she will only agree to surgery if they can guarantee that there will be no scars. She walks out and Zenas talks to her again, so she shares that she has lost her social life and can no longer attend balls where she can dance, all thanks to the hideous rash on her face. However, he convinces her that if she undergoes surgery, she will dance again, so she eventually agrees to let them perform the surgery. In the theater, the professor leaves the surgery in Crescent and Zenas' hands, warning Crescent not to mess up because there would be grave consequences. Zenas says he'll handle the surgery because he's done something similar as a kid, but the professor insists that Crescent should be in charge of the surgery since it was he who healed the puppy. Because the wimp can't confess that it was really Zenos who had healed the puppy, he shamelessly walks over and picks up the scalpel, even though he doesn't know the first thing about making an incision. Based on textbook knowledge, he assumes possible positions where the rash may be rooted, but Zenas runs an internal check on Charlotte's face, using his scan magic and whispers the actual positions to him. He also reassures Crescent that he would direct him, and all he has to do is act accordingly. The surgery continues, and the director says he's impressed with Crescent, but Crescent later says that some nerves are tangled, and the issue is that if he doesn't cut them at the root, then the rashes will remain and grow back. But if he cuts the nerves, then Charlotte's appearance would change. The director, the professor, tells him to deal with the roots, the growth at the roots, because if the rashes return, that would tarnish his image. But their best choice in that situation is to minimize the damage, so he grabs the scalpel, cuts the nerve, and yells at Crescent loudly enough for Charlotte's father to hear. He then tells Lord Fennel that his assistant, Crescent, ignored his instructions and damaged Charlotte's nerves, but he will try to salvage it with his health transfer magic, and hopefully that will reduce the disfiguration on her face. However, Zenas speaks up, saying that injury is not a problem and they can easily reattach the damaged nerve and Charlotte will be free again. He tells the professor that Charlotte has entrusted her life to their hands and it is all down to their actions to determine whether or not Charlotte will dance again. And so, he grabs the scalpel, fixes the damage, and Charlotte wakes up looking like a brand new Botox baby. She becomes emotional and cries, and remembering that the last voice that spoke to her in the theater was Zenas's, she asks her staff for his name. Later, Zenas helps Euman to carry some experimental storage bottles for Becker into the storage. He asks what sort of concoction is in the bottles, but she says she doesn't know. Just then, Crescent runs in excitedly, saying that both he and Zenos have been invited by the professor to attend one of his dinner parties. Obviously, Zenas is unmoved, but it is more surprising that Crescent doesn't sound as pompous and excited about this opportunity as he normally would, given that he's likely to be selected as an officer and get his promotion. At the dinner, the professor delivers a speech, sharing that the elections for the position of director are nigh and their faction has no reason to worry because they are highly populated and have the majority of the votes. In addition to an endorsement from one of the 7 lords of the capital, Lily is there as Zenos's +1 and wonders why Crescent doesn't have a guest. But Crescent says he just has way too many baby mamas to know to settle on one as his date. However, Lily asks why he didn't just ask Euman out since he bugs her all the time, but he says that he's got Zenas after all, and that's all he needs.
Why are you gay?
Anyway, after the professor gives the toast, it's time for Zenos to kickstart his mission and find answers to Alfred's sudden disappearance. Apparently, when Alfred disappeared, he was looking after the secretary, who was wasted to the core. So, Zenos starts by asking the secretary, Bonds, what he knows about Alfred's disappearance. The guy says that he can't remember much, but for sure, Alfred was a good kid who took care of him when he was hungover. Interestingly, Bonds says that Alfred was one of the very few who ever cared to look in his direction because the professor had already warned the other students that Bonds was a big fat liar. In that light, Lily asks why Bonds is working for the professor, given everything he has done to him, and he says it's because they go way back. Zenas thinks Bonds is so hammered that he can't remember anything, but Lily says that Bonds certainly knows something and doesn't want to reveal it, so all they have to do is get him to be more wasted. In his wasted state, Lily showers him with compliments and boosts his non-existent ego, allowing Zenos to recreate the same situation that happened the day Alfred disappeared. He takes Bonds out for some fresh air, and Bonds soon starts referring to talking to him as thinking he's Goldrin. Zenos plays along, getting Bonds to reveal that Lord Fennel had covered for the professor's buns 13 years back following an explosion that landed him in trouble. After this, Bonds passes out, and later in the elevator, Carmilla appears, saying she can piece his story together because she made sense of his ramblings. In the next scene, Zofia and the others wonder when Zenos is going to be back. But just then, a lizard man reports that one of their kin just got injured and is bleeding. The ladies suggest that Zofia should take her wounded brother to Zenos in the capital, but she doesn't want to blow his cover and spoil everything for him. However, Love tells her that Zenos can't be upset about that, and so she tells them to all get set to meet him and that she will pay him double his usual rate. Meanwhile, Carmilla narrates that on the day of a certain explosion, 13 years ago, an unremarkable researcher, that is, Professor Goldran, finds his life has changed forever, having saved a noble's life. However, when the ladies alongside Zenos all tried to make sense of it, Goldran was a low-budget healer, so he couldn't have saved anyone from damage coming from a fire accident. And so, Lily theorized, Lily guessed that someone else had rescued Lord Fennel's life and didn't want to take credit for it. So, Professor Goldran seized that opportunity years later, claiming to be the one who had healed Lord Fennel. However, his best friend Bonds knew the absolute truth and probably blackmailed him with it. And since Bonds knew this truth, he may have revealed it to Alfred, who became scared for his life and went into hiding to protect himself. Since it's Lily who comes up with this angle, she feels like Sherlock Holmes. But Crescent comes in, interrupts her moment of ecstasy, and says he wants to introduce her to some high-end, mighty people, with just Carmilla left behind. Zenos discusses that there might have been other victims of the fire explosion, and Goldrin, using his magic transfer of healing, may have transferred all their life forces to save Lord Fennel because he was a noble and he wanted to get in his good books. And Alfred might have been one of the victims who survived and wanted vengeance. The issue right now is where Alfred has run off to. But Zenos realizes that it isn't his job to figure this out, so he decides he'll report everything to Becker and move on with his life. But when Zenos steps outside, he notices that there is a commotion, and Yuman is standing before the guards seeking an audience with Zenos. Around her, the Beast Girls show up with Zofia's brother and are all looking for Zenos. Goldrun orders his security to get rid of the girls, but the girls get rid of them instead and explain to Zenos the emergency that brought them. Zenos says he's going to help right away, but the professor can't believe that after Zenos has just secured his path to glory in an elite faction, he's willing to throw it all away. However, Zenos says he's just a healer and doesn't care for money or fame, so he tells Crescent to look after himself and then picks Lily to go. The professor tells Crescent that he hopes he's not as dumb as Zenos, and Crescent says he isn't because he just wants enough money for his own harem. But after seeing how honorable Zenos has been, healing everyone regardless of status or class, he decides to stick with Zenos because chasing rice cakes will only get him herpes. With that, he quits the faction and runs to meet Zenos while he heals the wounded guy. The next day, Zenos reports his findings to Becker, and Becker says that Alfred had actually mentioned being involved in an accident as a child. Becker plans to attend the party Goldrun would hold to celebrate getting elected as director, because Alfred may want to get his revenge on that day. With that, he says Zenos has done his job, and he tells him to stay one more day for paperwork to fulfill the terms of his students' research, and that he will also get information regarding his teacher. However, for that day, they are going to host a party to honor Zenos as he leaves. At the party, Crescent is so devastated after finding out that Zenos will be leaving the royal hospital. However, Zenos says he should stay strong and be a good boy, and maybe he'll get some of Daddy's soy sauce. When everyone falls asleep, Zenos discusses with Carmilla, sharing how sad he is to part with such nice guys such as Crescent and Uman. The next day, Zenos says goodbye, and Uman gives him a letter containing details about his mentor. On the other hand, they find some evidence in Becker's desk, but it's already too late because Becker is standing right there in the professor's elevation party and every single person, including the professor, is dead. Just a few hours before this, Professor Goldrun holds a party for his election and is congratulated by Lord Fennel, who thanks him for saving his life. It all happened 13 years ago during an explosion where Goldrun was opportune to find Lord Fennel fatally wounded and save his life. Although it came at the expense of other lives he deemed less important, so he transferred their life forces. Unfortunately for him, Bonds captured the moment on a camera, so Goldrun was forced to make Bonds his secretary and grant him endless access to baddies and shots, so he would never be in his senses enough times to rat him out. Moments later, Becker shows up at the party with a bottle of grape juice to congratulate the professor. The professor complains to Becker that his research student, Zenas, was such an idiot who chose to treat some worthless demi-humans over staying in the reputable faction. And to the professor, such an act was unforgivable because not all lives are equal, and peasants do not deserve to be treated well. After giving a toast, Goldrin is excited because his time to shine has finally come, and he's about to become the next director. But soon, he begins to bleed from his mouth. Realizing too late that he's been poisoned by Becker, Professor Goldrin wonders why Becker has lost his marbles, and Becker tells him that 13 years ago, among the lives he sacrificed just to save a noble were two important souls, Alfred and Becker's fiancée. Presently, Becker had administered the same poison to everyone, which would make them lose consciousness and then take their lives completely in an hour. Although the professor's dose was lower, so he may have 2 hours before he died. He then tells the professor to choose a room to save among the lives of those lying there, since, after all human lives are not equal. At the same time, Becker also downs the poisoned drink, but in a small dose, and then he tells the professor that he may or may not have the antidote, and it's still up to him to decide and find out when he's done choosing who to save. The dumb prof decides to save himself by accumulating everyone's life force in there. But Becker tells him he has the most amount of life force there, so technically, he could get to save more people simply by sharing his own life force with all of them. However, the professor says his life was worth more than the other healers, because after all, they are there to serve him. At the same time, Becker started coughing up blood, and coincidentally, Human and the others rushed in, having seen incriminating evidence against the professor that Alfred and Becker's girlfriend were both survivors of the bomb blast. They asked Becker why he poisoned everyone, and he began narrating from about the same period as the blast how lovely his life was with his fiancée and how all their dreams together were shattered when she was involved in the explosion. Even after her death, Becker kept blaming himself, wishing he had been taken instead of her. But years later, he found out from Alfred, just before his disappearance, that the explosion was no accident and Professor Goldrin was responsible for the explosion. It was for this reason that Becker lost his cool and decided to end it all, knowing that Zenas would eventually find Alfred. However, Crescent tells Becker that it was understandable, the pain that accompanied losing his fiancée, but it is not justifiable because he didn't have to poison innocent people for that bundle of stupidity. In any case, Zenas doesn't have any time to waste, so he jumps right into action, aiming to rescue them as quickly as possible. Becker thinks this is impossible because Zenas wouldn't know the antidote or its ingredients, but Zenas says that he can't waste much time on that and will just cast a healing spell long enough for their body's immune system to kick in. Gradually, the poisoned victims regain consciousness one after the other, while Becker confesses that he just couldn't stand seeing a murderer rise to the ranks while his own fiancée is dead, unjustly. Anyway, everyone is now up except the professor, and he thinks he could run his big fat mouth, commanding Zenos to heal him. But Zenas ignores the fool, and everyone in the hall finds out that the professor had tried to sacrifice them to save his own life. Eventually, the prof begs Zenos to heal him, but Zenos triples his fees, and Lord Fennel shows his disgust at the fool. The next day, Becker gets interrogated by Human and Zenos in the presence of Krishna. He tells them that there was no real poison in the grape juice he had given everyone because he hadn't given the lethal dose or beyond a dose of paralysis, but someone had definitely tampered with his bottles, and that just had to be Alfred. Speaking of Alfred, Zenas realizes that the guy may not have simply survived the professor's attempt at draining his life force completely. So, the question to ask is who Alfred is. But Becker advises Zenos to watch his back because he is the one who spoiled Alfred's plans and will be forced to pay. However, Zenos doesn't really care about anything other than getting paid. When Zenos leaves, Krishna says she's somewhat jealous of his relationship with Becker, but Becker tells her that Zenos only came to see him because of Amin. They both comment on how he's such a great guy, and in the next scene, the caped guy finally reveals his identity as Alfred, who has yet again conceded another defeat to Zenos, but he still looks forward to the next time he'll see him. After all that has happened, Zenos receives the letter containing the information about his mentor, and with Lily, bids Umin and Crescent farewell as they return home. That brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe to the channel and comment Wet Water Lily if you watched to the end.